wanted to bring today's episode to the podcast, talking all about probiotics and really the health of the microbiome, why this matters for fertility. We've done many episodes on this on the podcast, all about gut health. Today, we're talking about different species of probiotics, why it's so important to take a generalized probiotic. And then we're talking about the health of the vaginal microbiome, the health of the oral microbiome, the skin microbiome, all of these and why these matter for fertility and why considering taking a probiotic for both men and women, it would be one of the foundational pieces for your fertility journey. Let's go. Hey, Katie, excited to have you back on the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Today we were talking all about probiotics. And I think over probably the last maybe 10 years in that kind of spectrum, it's now, you've got lots of companies kind of saying, oh, I've got a probiotic in my yogurt, or I've got people are taking probiotics and they may not really know kind of which one, is the best to take, what it's for, and especially, for fertility, why would it be, this is one of our foundational supplements, and why is it so important for someone who's on the fertility journey to make sure that they select the correct probiotic to optimize their fertility?
Yeah, exactly. It always makes me laugh, actually. You mentioned about the supermarkets and like things like yogurts, and I don't know about over there in Canada, but here we have one of the big things is like these little drinks, like the probiotic
Yep.
drinks.
Yep.
And you look at the ingredients and they're full of sugar, and it's just like, what is going on there? Because we know, I mean, I'm sure we'll delve into this later, Sarah, but we know that sugar feeds like bad bacteria. So it's like you're feeding the bad bacteria, but you're putting in the good, and it's just like it doesn't add up. It doesn't make sense to me. So yeah, it's gaining traction as a concept. Therefore, the food marketing people have latched onto it. But I think it's still an area where lots of people don't really know what they're doing, and they're just blindly hoping for the best.
Exactly. Yeah, they're putting all those food claims on. When there's a food claim on, you typically want to run away from it. So let's talk about the microbiome. Many people have heard about this. Sometimes people still haven't heard of it, but leaky gut, sort of things like that, where it's so important to work on your gut health and why it really matters.
Yeah, gut health. I mean, when we were in nutrition school, one of the fundamental things that we learned is always start with the gut. It is just the place that we begin with anything, and lots of people wonder why, like, what are the connections between the gut and fertility? Like, why on earth is this relevant for me? And the truth is, it's just so many ways, from our ability to absorb nutrients right through to, yeah, like in the large intestines, like what bacteria have you got living in your gut, and are they doing you a favor? Are they working with your body, or are they working against you? Because the gut is one of the key places that we find hidden inflammation, and we know that inflammation is bad news as far as fertility is concerned.
Yeah, and with leaky gut, so it's sort of if you've been taking antibiotics, or if you have chronic stress, or if you're dealing with if you've taken hormonal birth control, that can then predispose you to leaky gut. So you can eat all these healthy foods, and then you're not actually absorbing them, and then your body starts mounting an immune response to your favorite foods. And next thing you know, you were taking a whole bunch of almond milk with, in your smoothie, and then almond butter. And then next thing you know, you develop a almond sensitivity. That was me, because I hadn't cleared up the issues going on with the leaky gut. Can you just talk about that a little briefly?
Yeah, I always describe this in terms of, because it's very it's very like it's mechanics, right? It's biomechanical, and so the physiology of the large intestine is such that it has got a huge surface area, and so we imagine that the wall of the gut of the large intestine as having like fingers. So it's got villi, and the villi are like fingers like this that go up and down and up and down across the entire very long surface area of your gut. And what connects those villi is tight junctions. So they're held together physically by these junctions, right? So almost like a ligament of what holds your bones to your muscles, etc. And when we over time have things in our system that are problematic for the gut, like the things that you mentioned, the stress, the certain prescribed medications, including the contraceptive pill, if we are eating foods that we perhaps shouldn't be eating, whether that's because we've got a sensitivity to them or because it's a food that we didn't necessarily evolve to be eating, and heavily processed foods, etc., stress, even environmental toxins, all of those things can be a bit of a barrage for the gut, and then can actually break down those tight junctions. So then we've literally got gaps happening, and if we've got gaps happening, then molecules from the food that we're eating can then float into the bloodstream, and then of course the immune system is rightly doing its job and thinking that there is a foreign invader coming into the bloodstream, and then and it starts attacking, and then that's when we get more inflammation, and it just all acts as a vicious circle. So it's the health of our gut and our intestines is super important. And another factor that can impact that gut lining, the integrity of the gut lining, is the bacteria that live down there, and we have got, when we refer to the microbiome, we're referring to the bacteria that naturally reside in our body. And we are learning more and more about the microbiome. At first, it was the gut microbiome was the one that gained a lot of traction. But we also have microbiomes like our vaginal microbiome. We have an oral microbiome. We have even a lung microbiome, a urinary tract. Our skin has a microbiome. We have bug. We live in synchronicity with these bugs. There are more bugs that live on and in us than we have human cells by a large proportion. So we have the opportunity to either kind of work with the bugs and operate really symbiotically with them, or some bugs we don't work so well with, and we really want to address that, right? So this is what we're delving into today, is like these bugs essentially, and whether they are do-gooders or do-badders in terms of our health.
Yeah, and a lot of the antibiotics that we've taken have just, it kills the bad guys, but also the good guys. So that's why we're going to be talking all about probiotic today, and kind of, why is it important for fertility. So let's kind of talk about some of the studies of what they're seeing here around having a probiotic then for helping with various things. So let's go into those.
Yeah. So I mean, I mentioned the vaginal microbiome there, and that is something that is gaining a lot of attention now. It's a part of, it's a really exciting part of our new research looking into the impact of the microbiome, and more we're realizing about the significance of bacteria that can be found in the vaginal tract, and its connection to fertility and also miscarriage. So, we're always wondering if someone does have a presentation of kind of, particularly the unexplained infertility kind of crowd, or pregnancy losses. We're always wondering, like, is there something going on in the vaginal microbiome that we perhaps don't know about yet, and that's why Fab Fertile started doing the vaginal microbiome testing, so that we can actually see this. Now, in terms of some of the research around the vaginal microbiome and fertility, there was some researchers at Ghent University over in Belgium reported on this, and they found that the presence of bacteria that are associated with BV, so BV stands for bacterial vaginosis. And bacterial vaginosis is it's a bit of an umbrella term. So there's not one BV bacteria, there's a number of different bacteria that are associated with BV. So people with a BV presentation could have all or some of those bacteria. And they found that this has a strong and negative factor in overall fertility. And this in turn has been backed up by trials that show that quite a large percentage of women undergoing IVF actually test positive for BV. So women who are going through IVF aren't doing it for the fun of it. They're doing it because they're struggling with their fertility. So the question mark is the BV picture the reason that these women might actually be struggling in the first place? Now, chances are, I always find these things are never a straightforward picture. It's usually a mixture of multiple factors, but certainly the BV and the fertility do have really strong associations.
Yeah, that was for me. So yeast infections, which turned into bacterial vaginosis, and I didn't even really know what the heck was going on. And then, and those chronic UTIs, all of that kind of went together for me, and we see that a lot with people. So as we, address the health of the vaginal microbiome, this is a big topic. Katie and I have done a podcast episode on it, doing a deep dive into the vaginal microbiome as it is. So definitely listen to that episode. So let's talk about some more research and what we're seeing here around the importance of looking at the health of your gut or the microbiome for fertility.
Yeah, so I'm going to keep on the theme of the kind of reproductive organs here, specifically, and so another area that is, again, we're learning more and more about now is around the oral microbiome. I think I mentioned, and again, like, people might think, what on earth had the bacteria in my mouth got to do with my fertility? The truth is, what some researchers, so a study by someone called Agard found, is that they sampled placental tissues from 320 placentas, and they analysed some of the microbes that were actually present in those placental bodies, and there was a prominence of a specific bacteria called Fusobacterium nucleatum, which is a bit of a mouthful. And this bacteria is a bacteria that is normally found in the oral cavity. It's found in the mouth, and it's what we call an opportunistic bacteria. So it's a bacteria that can cause problems if it's left unchecked. And so what was really interesting about this study is that they realized that the Fusobacterium nucleatum can cross the placental barrier in pregnancy. And so people who have this in their mouth, it can then transfer down if their gut health isn't sitting tight, and, for example, if their stomach acid isn't robust enough to kill off some of the microbes, then that Fusobacterium can travel all the way down to the gut, found in the stools. And by proxy, if it's then just in that person's system, in that mother's system, we then know that it can cross the placental barrier. And this is that specific bacteria, the Fusobacterium nucleatum, is associated with negative pregnancy outcomes. So it is one that we're always looking out for and keeping an eye on, because it's just an example of how these microbes can be problematic. Now, I think it's really important when we're talking about microbes. Lots of us might feel a little bit fearful, because I think, generally speaking, in the modern world, we do live in a bit of like a germ fearing culture, and bacteria are considered bad. Everywhere you look, there's products on the shelves that promise to kill off 100% of bacteria. Now, it's not bacteria itself that we need to fear here. When we're hearing about these bacterial species in our body, that is not something to be scared of, because the right bacteria are, as I say, we have a really symbiotic relationship with. So it's not like we want to be sterile. We want bacteria to live in our bodies, but we just want it to be the right kind.
Wiping everything out with all the different disinfectants and those hand sprays and all the rest of it. Yeah.
I mean, a massive, one of the most prominent theories as to why we have so much allergy and autoimmunity now is the hygiene hypothesis, which is that we just live in these over clean, over sterile environments, and we're never exposed to bacteria, and so our immune systems just can't take it when we are. And there's research from Sweden that showed that people who grew up on farms and had exposure to dirt and animals and all of those kind of things actually had far less precedence of things like asthma, eczema, hay fever, allergies, and autoimmunity. So anyway, that's a story for another time, perhaps. But it's super interesting.
Absolutely. Yeah. Go play in the dirt. Okay. And what other studies here? We've got another study here talking about things for us to dig into.
Yeah, so there was a journal called Seminars in Reproductive Medicine, and a 2014 study published there showed that. So this is coming back to this, I mentioned at the start, this principle around inflammation and some of the ways in which inflammation, which can be sneaky and hide in different parts of the body, can impact fertility. So generally speaking, what this study showed was that our sex, or our two main sex hormones for women, the estrogen and progesterone, which do this delicate balance across the menstrual cycle. This study showed that when women do have underlying inflammation going on in their bodies, it can be associated with estrogen dominance. And when we have estrogen dominance, what that can in turn mean is that there is a relative lack of progesterone, because what the progesterone does in the second half of our cycle is offset the estrogen. And we need both, but they do a dance throughout the menstrual cycle. And it's the progesterone that actually helps to prepare the body for pregnancy and prepare the lining of the uterus for pregnancy, and then actually to sustain that pregnancy once we are pregnant, particularly before in the first trimester, before the placenta takes over. So generally speaking, lower progesterone is part of the reason. It's a very common reason, a common finding in women that are experiencing fertility problems, and it's implicated in pregnancy loss, early pregnancy loss as well, because that role that progesterone has to play in actually maintaining a pregnancy. So it's this kind of this knock-on effect that we start to think about of if our microbiome is out of balance. So we call that dysbiosis. If there's dysbiosis going in the body, it's more likely to have an inflammatory response internally. That can be either because of the integrity of our so structurally, because of our gut lining or our mucosal barriers aren't working hard enough to protect us, or because the bacterial species themselves, the reason they cause inflammation is because they produce byproducts. So every living organism, by definition, has to put things into it to survive, and it has to excrete to survive as well. And so it's the excretion, which is often gases or something called LPS, lipopolysaccharides. It's the excretion, what they give out. That is the problem. That's the thing that becomes problematic and causes this inflammatory response. So if we've got dysbiosis, i.e., microbiome dysregulated, so those bugs or our integrity is causing inflammation, and then inflammation is more likely to be associated with this estrogen dominance picture, i.e. lack of progesterone, and that is associated with fertility issues across the board. So it's this cycle, as I say. So much in the body is cyclical, and one thing impacts another. So that's a part of the process that we're looking at. And so there were some Finnish researchers that found that CRP, so C-reactive protein, is one marker that we have of inflammation. There are a number of inflammatory markers that we can look at in the body. CRP is one of them. They found the CRP levels in the blood were substantially lowered when participants were given a drink that contained probiotics. So it's think it's thinking, coming back to this connection of the good bacteria, right? And this is how it's often marketed in the adverts, like friendly bacteria. And while some of the marketing claims might be a little bit out there in terms of what's actually good for you, it is true that those good bacteria are beneficial because they have this direct connection to our inflammatory markers in a really positive way. So as much as the bad bacteria can be problematic, the good bacteria are really good news.
Yeah, this is part of our blood chemistry review too, that we're not diagnosing, but we're educating. And so looking at the C-reactive protein, it should be for a female between nothing over 1.5, whereas in the Western side of things, it could be it could be normal if it's over 3. Sorry, if it's under 3. So this is where you look at things from a functional perspective. It's just tighter reference ranges. So it's for optimal health, whereas the conventional reference ranges is sort of people with disease. So things are typically missed. So if you've got a high inflammation marker going on in your body, that's a clue that something is, it's a missed healing opportunity and needs to be dug into.
Yeah, that's right. And I think the thing, even inflammation now is a term that is bandied around a lot. And it's really important to understand that inflammatory responses are there to protect our body. They are there to be helpful. So if we've got an injury, for example, we get a rush of redness to the area, and or pain and redness and swelling. Those things are all actually a part of the healing process. And so acute inflammation in the context of kind of illness or injury, that's helpful. It's there to protect, and it helps the white blood cells go to where they need to go in the body. Where inflammation becomes problematic is where we've got this low grade inflammation over a long period of time, which tons of us are subject to. And it's not only fertility that struggles. We're talking about like the big killers of today, the cardiovascular disease, the CRP and cardiovascular disease are intricately correlated. So, we're not just talking about reproductive health here. We're talking about you and your life. So it is really, really important stuff.
Absolutely. And it's empowering where your numbers, you can dig deeper. And as we're saying today, starting with a probiotic would be like a nice first step. Okay. And so let's just talk about what, pardon me.
That topic, sorry, Sarah, just to while I think of it, is just to add that part of the Fab Fertile approach is that the stool testing is standard, and there's another inflammatory marker that we often see elevated in the stool. So CRP is one marker, but calprotectin is another marker of localized inflammation in the digestive tract, and that can help to give us some real insight into that gut health, which then correlates with the wider health too. So, as you say, knowledge is power, and knowing your numbers is not just interesting but really helpful.
Absolutely. Then we can put together that personalized protocol for you, because you could be taking heaps of supplements, doing all sorts of different sort of fertility superfoods or following generalized guidelines, but are they right for you? And when we kind of use the testing, look at your blood work, dig deeper, then we can come up with that personalized protocol. Okay, so probiotics, kind of what are we looking for as far as when we're trying to select one?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I think my first tip is always if you're having a probiotic in like one of these supermarket kind of drinks, it's just to be mindful of that principle that sugar is bad for your gut microbes, right? So sugar feeds so the bad microbes that we don't want to see. So if you are drinking those drinks, please just check the ingredients list and make sure that it doesn't also contain sugar. So that's just a tip, because that's something that can be found in so many stores. So in terms of actually taking a probiotic supplement, I mean, there are a lot out there. And generally speaking, we do we do want to go fairly broad spectrum. You know, there are keynote species in the gut in particular. So lactobacillus, of which there are, you know, there's lots of different types of lactobacillus, and bifidobacterium. These are two of the keynote species. And often we find when we are doing the stool testing, we often find that either one or both of those is depleted. Not for everybody, but they are ones that we want those to be in higher numbers, because they are some of the key generators of anti-inflammatory properties, and they react with other species in the gut. So we do want to make sure that we've got kind of good levels of different lactobacilli and bifidobacterium coming in. And generally speaking, like, we do want to have at least 20 billion CFU within well, yeah, like it does vary. Sorry, excuse me, I said 20, I meant 15 plus CFU for and what that refers to is like almost like the amount of different organisms you've got in there. So you do get a lot of probiotic supplements that are either you look at the ingredients and like there's very few strains in there, which isn't necessarily a bad thing if you are being really targeted. So if you've done testing and you know, you've done stool testing, you've done vaginal microbiome testing, and you know that there are really specific species that you need, that's okay. But for general maintenance and general health, we do want to go more broad spectrum, because the bacteria in your gut are like, I always liken it to having a lawn. And so if you've got a lawn in your gut, the lawn are the species of good bacteria. And so we want to make sure that your lawn is full of nice lush grass, right? And if you've got any holes, any gaps in your lawn, you know, a few days later you turn around and there's weeds growing in it, right? And so the spaces leave space for weeds, and the weeds are the bad bacteria. So one of the basic principles that we want to think about is we need to have enough of the good bacteria. So we need our lawn to be nicely populated so that there's not the gaps there where the weeds can grow. It's kind of just one of the best preventative measures, I guess, for that dysbiosis.
Yeah, and so I'm getting a visual on the lawn for some reason why I'm thinking about the vaginal microbiome. It's like, get our lawn in order. Yeah, and so it's interesting. So you take that broad spectrum one, and then when we dig deeper, we do the vaginal microbiome testing. We can do stool testing, and then it's like, oh, wait a minute, we need to have, you know, maybe you're lower and these different beneficial bacteria. Maybe, you know, you've got yeast going on. Maybe something, you know, you've got bacterial vaginosis, something going on, and then there's specific strains we can use to bring in to take that very customized approach. But starting out, everyone doing that broad spectrum one.
Yeah, exactly. Sort your lawn out.
Get your lawn in order. Okay, and so anything else you wanted to say? Kind of again, check out that podcast we did on the vaginal microbiome. It's a very detailed podcast episode there. But anything else kind of we wanted to say on the vaginal microbiome from a fertility spectrum, just as far as a broad spectrum probiotic?
Yeah, I mean, it's. I guess it's just to note that and we do cover this in a lot more detail in the vaginal podcast. But I mentioned lactobacilli there as being one of the keynote species in the gut. Lactobacilli are also the dominant species, well, the only species that we really want to see in the vaginal tract. So if you are taking a nice broad spectrum probiotic with lactobacilli or different strains of lactobacilli within it, then generally that is likely to be helpful for the vaginal microbiome. And the reason that's important in the vaginal tract is because the reason they're called lactobacilli is because they produce lactic acid, and the lactic acid that they produce helps to keep that slightly acidic environment in the vaginal tract, which keeps it then safe from other microorganisms coming in. So generally speaking, lactobacilli should be a part of any broad spectrum probiotic. if we do vaginal microbiome testing and we find that there are things in there that we don't want, same with the stool testing. Like, it's not always about repopulating or making sure that we've got enough of the good stuff. Sometimes if we find that we are overrun with things that shouldn't be there, we need to consider wiping them out a bit and using some. We tend to go for herbal antimicrobials over antibiotics where possible, because we know that antibiotics can be harmful for the body, for the digestive tract, and also for in terms of overall, like, global microbial resistance, so microbes that are resistant to drugs. So we want to avoid antibiotics where possible. Sometimes there's a time and a place for them, but in most instances we might recommend that someone does a herbal antimicrobial protocol, which, by the way, should always be done under the guidance of a practitioner, never just taking a stab in the dark. And then we work on building up, and we go through this protocol where we will kind of work on wiping out and rebuilding and restoring. So there's a number of things that can be done when we do find imbalances. And as I say, there's a number of strains there that might be particularly useful for you as an individual, whether that's to do with your vaginal microbiome or the gut microbiome.
Yeah, and some of this you can DIY, and then it starts getting a little more complex, and you really want to take that personalized approach. And so a guide can really help you fast track success. Obviously, you're on the fertility journey right now, and you want to have your baby, so it's important to really, to me, get a guide to figure this out. Okay, and we've been talking a lot about the female. It is equally as important for the male to take a probiotic as well to reduce inflammation, oxidative stress, producing healthy testosterone. It's which all supports sperm health, is key for the male as well.
Yes, absolutely. And I mean, I'm sure we've said this before, and I'm sure we'll say it again, Sarah, which is that the male side of things is equally as important as the female side. This is a journey that we just see far too many women taking on themselves and thinking that it's their responsibility to do everything, it's their fault, which is never ever, like, we don't look at things in those terms. It's nobody's fault. And so we do need to share the load, but also that the male is 50% of the equation, right? And so it's really important that he looks at this as well. And with the Fab Fertile Method, the male probiotic is equally as important, or the male taking the probiotic, and it's for all the same reasons, right? That male sex hormones might differ slightly in terms of what they are, but the principles remain the same. They are responsive to what is going on in terms of the internal microbiome. They are responsive to the level of inflammation in the body. And we know that for men in particular, inflammation is part of a picture, or can be part of a picture, of oxidative stress. Oxidative stress is terrible news for sperm, right? Because oxidative stress can cause damage to sperm. And sperm, the quality of sperm is getting so bad now that the authorities just keep having to change the goalposts and change the guidelines and lower them, because and so what would have been considered infertile 20 years ago, they're now saying is normal sperm. And yet we have 50% of couples struggling with their fertility. So it's, don't get me started on that one, but it's super important.
Yeah, over the last 40 years, sperm counts have reduced by 50%. So it's important to look at the health of the male partner. It always baffles me that someone's dealing with miscarriage, anyone on the fertility journey, the woman has done all these changes, and the man's like, I'm super supportive, but he really hasn't really done much, because no one has really told him what he can do. And most people, like 99% of the partners, are like, I'm ready to do whatever it takes, but no one's given him a preconception plan. It's just, the woman may have her, female factor infertility, and his sperm may be fine, but there's things he can do to optimize his preconception health. And especially when his sperm is not fine, there's things he can do. And there's a lot of, men typically aren't talking a lot about this, right? Women are starting anonymous Instagram profiles or joining Facebook groups talking all about this, and men just don't do that. It's a little more people in the, men with fertility issues coming forward, but still it seems to be more vocal on the female side. But it's, the positive side of thing is there's things he can do. It's empowering, and it is to get a guide to help you along the way.
Yeah, and I think on the male side, when we're thinking about the whole semen analysis piece of the puzzle, I mean, there's so many issues with that. The first is that half the time men are told their sperm is fine, and then we look at the results and it's not, and it's just flippantly dismissed and not taken into account. Second is that sometimes the male sperm is not okay, but they're told, oh, it's fine, we'll just do ICSI and it doesn't matter because it only takes one. But the thing is with the only takes one approach is that we don't know, like with that one, we don't know like if there's DNA damage going on with that sperm. The standard semen analyses do not take into account the amount of DNA damage to the sperm. It's not something that a standard test can look at. And so, and yet it's this oxidative stress, the inflammation that can really drive that DNA damage. And if the sperm has got damage to the DNA, that's going to make problems for either fertilization, or the actual development of that embryo. And the other thing that isn't routinely looked at, and this has just come up for me with one of my clients recently, and her partner is a semen culture. So we're talking about the vaginal microbiome. The semen has a microbiome as well, and so often if we're seeing an infection picture within the female, often even though it's not categorized as a sexually transmitted infection or a sexually transmitted disease, you are getting infections that are crossed between partners. And so that this needs to be addressed. And again, semen cultures are not routinely done by fertility clinics, by doctors as part of the fertility workup. So yeah, it's important. It's important stuff.
Absolutely. Dig deeper. Don't take no for an answer. Get a second opinion. Yeah. You know your body best. Okay, let's talk about some foods we can do. And typically, so foods are really important to do along with the probiotics. So what are some prebiotics that we can look to take?
Yeah, so first of all, just to define, so probiotic, prebiotic. So a probiotic is referring to the actual bacteria. So if we're talking about a probiotic supplement, for example, what that means is that we're literally putting the species of bacteria into the gut, and providing that it's a product that actually manages to stay intact through the gastrointestinal tract. So again, when we're looking at products, like not all supplements, not all probiotic supplements have been tested to make sure that they can withstand things like the stomach acid, etc. And we want to make sure that they're actually releasing into the right part of the body. So that is an important part of the equation when we're choosing a supplement. But so probiotic is the actual bacteria. So trying to literally repopulate the gut by putting the bacteria in there. But of equal importance is the prebiotic. And the prebiotic is thinking about feeding the bacteria. So what I said before about the rules of life of any living organism needs to do two things. It needs to feed on something, and it needs to excrete. Those are the fundamental principles of life. And so the bacteria, the good bacteria that we want, they feed on different things. And I've mentioned a few times already today that the bad bacteria, as a general rule, tend to feed off sugar and refined carbohydrates, often processed foods, these kind of things, right? And that's why those bacteria have been allowed to proliferate, or part of the reason they've been allowed to proliferate over time, because we're much more likely to eat those kind of foods these days. The good bacteria, they feed off. So prebiotic refers to the foods that they like to feed off. And really, as a general rule of thumb, the best way to think of that is fiber. So fiber is prebiotic in nature, right? And so we're talking there's different types of carbohydrates. There's simple carbs, and then fiber refers to like more complex carbs are likely to have high fiber content. And this is why I'm not the biggest fan of a ketogenic diet. It's under the right circumstances for some people. It might be right, but a ketogenic diet puts you at higher risk. And there's been research papers on this as well, where the diversity of the microbiomes have been studied using different diets. And what we see generally in people who have a ketogenic diet is that there is a relative lack of diversity of species. And it's because there's not enough fiber in there because they're avoiding the carbs completely. So we do need to remember that like carbs aren't necessarily the enemy. It's the type of carb that we eat. And so high fiber carbohydrates, we always forget. I think lots of people think of fiber and think, oh yeah, like bran and wheat and like all of these kind of big grains, but that's again, that's a lot of that is down to food marketing. Really, like the best way to get more fiber into your diet is to eat a diverse array of plant foods, and that includes all different vegetables, all different colors, particularly like dark colored berries are really good for feeding. There's particular species in the gut called Akkermansia, and we often do see that depleted or missing in some people. For some people, it's the opposite way around. But so dark colored berries are really good for them. But then other kind of more classic prebiotic foods, I guess, include like onions and garlic, and resistant starches. So a trick on the resistant starches is if you cook a starchy food like potatoes or sweet potatoes and you leave them to cool, they become higher in resistant starch. So I can't remember exactly why, but it's one of those things, like if you are trying to make a conscious effort to kind of refeed your gut diversity, then having some cooled potatoes can help to increase that starch.
Yeah, and sweet potatoes or dandelion greens can be helpful too. And then, so some foods that are rich in probiotics would be fermented foods if you can tolerate them. So kimchi, kombucha, miso, sauerkraut. Now, if you have yeast or histamine, so when I have kombucha or sauerkraut, like it makes my face like flush, my knees, I feel like they're burning. So like I've got like there's more yeast, kind of, I'm yeasty prone. So for me, those don't work. Same with the miso and things like that. So see how you tolerate. But if you know you have a yeast issue or a histamine issue, if you can talk about just briefly about that for people, I would avoid.
Yeah, I mean, these fermented foods, generally speaking, are a great idea. But the way that some of them work is that they can produce things like histamine in the gut, and actually some probiotic products can also produce histamine in the gut. So, if you know that you've got a massive histamine issue, then you might want to consider taking a probiotic that is like contains particular species that aren't going to generate that histamine response. And really it is about your individual sensitivity, right? And the idea is that as we begin to work on those junctions, those barriers that we spoke about before in terms of the intestinal integrity, the idea is that once we work on that, we work on healing that part of the body, then it's the idea is that you will be more tolerant of histamine and not so sensitive to histamine, right? So that's the idea. And another situation though where the probiotic foods, so the fermented foods, can be problematic is in people that have SIBO. So if you've got an overgrowth of bacteria in your small intestine, because generally speaking, by comparison, your small intestine should be far, far less populated than bacteria than your large intestine. There can be some, but some people do have an overgrowth of bacteria in the small intestine, and what that does is if someone has that really bloated picture, so if you're someone that like bloats out after anything you eat, or you start the day kind of with a flatter stomach and by the end of the day you look 6 months pregnant, then that can be a sign that there's an imbalance in the small intestine, and probiotic foods aren't necessarily helpful helpful because they can go and make that problem worse.
Yeah, and as part of our Fab Fertile method, so we do the stool testing, we do food sensitivity testing and genetic testing as well. But and then we do a blood chemistry review and a review for semen. So it's really important for to be able to look at what's going on in your stool. So then you can then take that very personalized approach because some of this figuring out the right strains and things like that can be a little complex. So with the SIBO piece, sometimes people are going down the SIBO path. We typically will look at other things before we go to SIBO. So like if there's H. pylori or other different things going on in their body. So I know there's a whole SIBO thing going on and people race to figure out if they have SIBO, and that's kind of not where we start.
Yeah, because I think, like with anything, if I've got someone who's presenting with a possible SIBO picture, it's not necessarily the SIBO itself that's the problem, because we're always looking at the underlying drivers, right? And so if someone does have a SIBO presentation, we want to know why. Like, why has there been why is there an overgrowth of bacteria in the small intestine? And a lot of the time, yeah, that is linked to what is going on upstream of that or downstream of that, or sometimes both. So it's things like, yeah, making sure that there's no issues with that person's hydrochloric acid in their stomach, making sure that like food transit time isn't taking too long, like our bowels are actually moving regularly, because when that food transit time is slow, it's more likely that we're going to have a SIBO picture. And again, making sure that the large intestine microbiome is in balance, because if it is not and it's imbalanced, then that's again, like, things can start to creep upstream. So we need to always consider digestive health from north to south and look at the full picture and not just fixate on the SIBO, because I've known people who have like fixed their SIBO, but it just comes back and back and back because you're not addressing the underlying cause of what's going on.
Exactly. And so for some gut repair, we like bone broth or collagen. Anything else there for gut repair?
Yeah, I mean, those are really, really nice foods for helping to heal the gut. And bone broth, there's a big difference between stock and bone broth. I think some people think if they boil up some bones for a couple of hours, then they're going to have a nice, nourishing bone broth. It does need to be like at least 12 hours to release the right nutrients from the bones to have that kind of gut supporting impact. Yes, collagen, great. L-glutamine is lovely as well. But again, when we're looking at any kind of gut kind of repairing product or supplement, it really does need to be personalized, guys, especially if you're trying to conceive, because not all products are safe for every situation, and some things can interact with medications and all sorts of other things. So if you are thinking about doing some kind of gut protocol, then please do it under the guidance of a practitioner.
And then so how to take the supplements for probiotics. So we like a low and slow approach because if there are issues going on, you may have side effects. So what are you seeing there?
Yeah, exactly that. Like, some people who go in with like a full dose of something, they might have a reaction. It might be that their bodies just can't tolerate it, and so especially because we're literally putting bacteria in, it is better to start off with a lower dose and titrate up. And I know at Fab Fertile we even do this with the probiotics, to the extent where we say half the like open up the capsule and just like take a half at the start and do it that way and build up gradually, because otherwise people could go in with a full dose and suddenly get the stomach cramps or the skin outbreaks or the migraines or the whatever else it might be for them, because the gut has all sorts of weird and wonderful reactions, and they're thinking, oh, I'm never going to take that probiotic again, it did this. And so it's not that probiotic wasn't helpful, it's just that we overloaded your system. And sometimes if what can happen when we're supporting our lawn and crowding out the bad bacteria is that we can get die-off symptoms from some of the bad bacteria that are in there. And so it's not just that we're overloading with the good stuff, it's that we're having die-off symptoms from some of the bad ones being killed off.
And what if it's an actual a pill or a supplement, like a instead of an actual capsule? Can we still break that in half then, or how do we do that?
Yeah. So probiotics are like they're fine to be opened up. So like lots of probiotics are just like powders, and so all you've got in a capsule is a powder inside a capsule, right? So it's absolutely fine to do that. They generally don't taste of anything. You can sprinkle it on your food, have it in your drink, have it in your smoothie or whatever, and it's absolutely fine.
In this case, if it is not the powder, it's just the supplement piece, you can still do the same thing, break it in half.
With a capsule, yeah. Mhm.
Yeah. Okay, awesome. Any final thoughts on probiotics today, Katie?
No, I just hope that we've got across how important the microbiome is across the board, again, from top to bottom, the oral, the vaginal, all aspects of the microbiome, the gut, and how important and integral they are to our hormonal function, to inflammation, to like the placenta. There's so many ways in which the microbiome can impact fertility, and this is why the probiotics make a fundamental piece of the Fab Fertile method.
Absolutely, yeah. It's one of those foundational supplements that you need to make sure you're taking the right kind and that it's right for you. Thanks again.
Thank you.